Welcome to the Tragedy Girls podcast. I mean, the Final Girls podcast. I'm Anna Bogutska, co-founder of the Final Girls Collective and your podcast host. If you're new to the show, welcome. We're currently in the last handful of episodes of our fourth series exploring all things teen horror. Very much expanding the definition of what makes a teen horror film, how they've evolved, and particularly focusing on why teenagers and teenage girls make for some of the most compelling protagonists and villains of the genre. And there's no film that combines all of those elements more than 2017's Tragedy Girls. Joining me to go deep on this film and the moment in horror history when it landed on our screens is recurring guest and friend of the podcast, Jordan Crucchiola. A quick reminder before we dive in, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at The Final Girls UK, and you can also support our work on Patreon at patreon.com/The Final Girls. If you don't want to support us though, that's fine, but if you can take a few seconds to leave us a review, hopefully a positive one, on either Apple or Spotify podcasts, I deeply appreciate that, and it really helps people discover the show. And as usual, do keep in mind that we spoil everything about the film pretty much from the very beginning. So if you haven't seen it yet, keep that in mind if you're spoiler averse. I would say though, considering the Tragedy Girls never got a UK release, and if you need to be convinced to discover and find this film, then do listen to this episode. And we keep it pretty light on the plot specific spoilers, but we do talk about the film as a whole from the very first moment. And with all of that said, please enjoy our take on Tragedy Girls. Now that we're recording, you can tell me off about using Clean Feed instead of Zoom and not being able to see each other's faces, Jordan.
It feels like a slight against our friendship, is what it is. It feels like I've, you know what? It feels like I've been demoted. That's what it feels like. I'm like, oh,
never.
There it is.
Never.
Yeah, no, this is so Anna can just do a bunch of stuff in the background and just like I'm being left on read in
absolutely would never. Dude, we were joking about before, and I just want this tone to continue throughout the recording of this episode, Jordan, because you did say, if I'm allowed to quote you, that this was the only time in our friendship that you've taken a tone with me.
Yeah,
and I kind of dig it.
And I've shot myself in the ass apparently by being like, God damn it! Like, God, I spend all this time with this crush on Anna as my dear friend, being like, oh, I hope the pretty popular girl likes me more. And then I put myself in a position where I'm like, I'm gonna say fuck you for a minute, and she's like, oh, good. And I'm like, oh, there's no winning. There's no winning.
Everything is winning with us, Jordan. That's the point.
Overall, that is true. But imagine, guys, you've heard me talk on Anna's pods a lot of times now. But like me as a person, I was so excited that I was going to see my friend today, and then I get a link to a thing that I don't know what it is, and it is this Clean Feed interface, and there's just no visual component, and I'm like, what? Like, oh dear. We're not hanging out, like.
But we are hanging out. This is like in high school. You know, we're doing the thing when we're talking on the phone for hours. Obviously, we've spoken for the full 90 minutes before hitting record, as it is law. As it is the Crucchiola law. Like, whenever I schedule our recordings, I always schedule them for double the time because that's what happens, and I cherish that. And it's like speaking on the phone with a friend, like in high school. Well, you know, we're women of a certain age, so like in high school, I would talk on the landline phone with my two friends that I had in high school. And this is kind of the same, but instead of a landline phone, we have a very expensive laptop and microphones.
I have been, because I'm I am a demanding, but I would say I am at once demanding, but not high maintenance about hanging out with my friends. Like there's not like a lot of conditions on it. It's not hard to like set a plan with me. It's not like, oh God, it's always something with Jordan. But like, no, I'm very easy to spend time with, to make time with. I want a lot of time. I want a lot of time, and I want it as often as I can have it. And so most of my interactions with like my dearest friends, like the lead up to them is me like negotiating how much I can press for more of their time without like becoming annoying about it. It's a balance I've learned throughout my life in my nearing 37 years. And I have a friend who recently, one of my closest friends, Botcast co-host Margot Carlson, actually. She got COVID recently, so she's been in quarantine for 2 weeks. And you could ask me how long it's been, and I'd be like, I don't know, fucking 6 months since I've seen her. It's been 2 weeks. And I'm like, this is some bullshit. And like my texts to her are like, how do I convey that this has been so stupid without like making her feel responsible for me being annoyed that she's unavailable through the completely not her fault circumstances of having COVID-19 and not wanting to give it to other people. But I am so fucking done with her quarantine because I want to hang out with my friend.
You know what? I feel like this is precisely the right mood to be in to talk about Tragedy Girls.
100%. I'm always operating as a tragedy girl.
How comes you don't have a podcast called Tragedy Girls?
They beat me to it with the title. Well, you can't like trademark a title or something like that, but it would just feel so gauche. Who am I? Am I the Brianna Hildebrand? I'm probably the, Alexandra Shipp of the two of them. Like, that's probably more my personality between these two, but it is absolutely, why this movie sang to me so much when I first saw it. Cause it was like, oh yeah, these two friends who are obsessed with each other and like jealously guard one another's time, but at the same time, like, in a way that like we probably talked about on this very podcast before, if not on others, just the ability, and Jennifer's Body succeeded in this way too, the ability to have characters, like female friendship characters that are both obsessed with each other, but who do not necessarily forsake any other kind of relationship in their life in that like toxic female friendship, single white female kind of way in order to exist with one another. Like they're interested in boys, like one of them starts like seeing a guy and it puts a strain on their friendship, but it is not like a comment on the friendship that either one of them spends time with another person. There still is the option for them to have lives outside of this friendship, even though the core of their lives is that friendship. So it's not like all gross and totally like, I don't know where I end and you begin and like nightmare hell if we're not spending every second together, which is like a fun kind of codependency in and of itself. But there deserves to be a multitude of representations in extremely close and intimate female friendships.
So let's backtrack a little bit. And before we dive into the friendship element, which is, I think, the core theme of this film.
Yeah, it's a friendship love story.
Totally. You know, that unnamed female friendship love story. That is the sandbox love.
Yep, never dies.
Can you summarize Tragedy Girls for me?
Yes, Tragedy Girls is the story of two, I forget where they live.
It's just generic Midwestern, Rosedale.
I was going to say, it's got to be Midwest, right?
Yeah,
like, I was thinking only of region.
Midwest,
it seems like, yeah.
I am not sure,
Midwest,
to be honest. The town is called Rosedale, but I don't know if it's a real town or if it's a town that's made up for the movie. It's just like, you know, a generic American high school in the Midwest.
Yeah, like Midwest Nowhere, USA. And it's these two girls who are best friends and very pretty. They are desperate for both like sort of something to happen around them in this town and also to get a lot of fucking attention. This movie came out, was this 2017?
2017?
Yeah, 2017. This movie came out. It was becoming zeitgeisty to incorporate clout chasing and influencing into depictions of teen life. And it was, you know, we were aware that this was now a ubiquitous and sometimes sometimes threatening and omnipresent part of life, social media, and sort of how it was changing our brains and changing our priorities. And whether or not it was making us like kind of little sociopaths.
The other thing is that horror is experiencing at this point in time already a resurgence. So it's now become quite commercially viable again. And also specifically women and girls enjoying and talking and engaging with horror has also become massive. On the way to becoming massive.
That bubble is expanding rapidly.
Yep. And this is also the year of Get Out. So everybody's talking about horror.
Everybody's talking about horror. And so these two teen girls, they are constantly trying to get people to follow us on social media. Like and subscribe. And there are killings happening in their town, and they endeavor to harness the sensation around these killings into them having like exclusive insider access into what's going on, because they get involved with the killer in a surprising way and then decide once they have the killer sort of in their grips to then just become the story themselves. And in order to perpetuate the hysteria in the town, the Tragedy Girls, which becomes their handle, the Tragedy Girls start killing people because they can't let the fervor die. They can't let their proximity to the sensation go away. And they do, in fact, become little phenomena, because they are the ones sort of at the epicenter of everything that's going on, with reports and sentiments and thoughts and prayers. And it is also at the same time a best friend love story about these two haughty little sociopaths who are sort of finding their way through adolescence, deeply connected to one another, only aware of one another, the only ones aware of one another's secret about being murderers, but also having feelings and having hormones and having to navigate through the end of high school together. So it's a fun romp of a time with great inserts of blood and guts in it too. And Josh Hutcherson is here as the resident moody hot guy who has a preposterous social media following, seemingly for just posting photos of like him and his motorcycle.
Oh, I will get back to Josh Hutcherson because he has showed up now twice in this teen horror season as a horror heartthrob, which is a term that my friend producer Jen Handorf coined on that episode when we talked about detention. And but I digress. I will come back to that in a minute. First, I want to talk about Michaela, as played by Alexandra Shipp, and Sadie, as played by Brianna Hildebrand, and their characters and their friendship. Like, you already started talking about it, but this really is about them being friends and them being the similar kind of crazy and the similar kind of fans and the similar kind of hungry as well, which is fairly rare, I think, in these type of high school female friendships. Like, it usually is opposites, isn't it? It's not two girls who are of similar levels of popularity, similar levels of attractiveness, similar tastes, and same goals. Like, they seem to be going side by side in parallel towards the same thing. One's typically a Jennifer
and one's typically a Needy.
Yes. So what do you make about the friendship of Michaela and Sadie?
I really, I mean, it was, at the time when it came out, it was really, it didn't feel like something, it wasn't common, it was not commonplace. It's barely commonplace now, but it didn't feel like something I had seen in the way that it centered this best friendship, without, in a not veiled way, just in a very forward, unself-conscious way. It wasn't about these two girls feel so strongly for, I feel like what we often see in this space is two girls who feel so strongly for each other and who are either so resolved in that certainty with one another, like say like a Heavenly Creatures, that they're willing to do horrible things in secret to protect this dynamic, or they feel such a strong connection to one another, and either one or both is so sort of unsure about the implications of it, that there's a sort of talking around the true nature of the intimacy that they share. Like, because there's just a discomfort with the broad paintbrush of queerness that doesn't necessarily have to mean you're fucking your best friend for you guys to have like a fluid relationship or have a very sort of shrinking space between the two of you, where we're sort of romance and non-romance, platonic and non-platonic become blurry. It was just these two girls seem very sure of one another, very celebratory of their weirdness. They don't feel afraid of how their dynamic appears to other people. Mm-hmm. There is not like there doesn't seem to be a worry or concern that they will be misperceived as like dykes because they hang out together all the time. And just that easy comfort with Sadie and Michaela being each other's one and only, and the sort of lack of plot involved with them having to like be worried about that or having to factor in like a societal expectation around it. Like there's conflict between the two of them because there's conflict in fucking stories. Because the thing that matters most in this movie is in fact the relationship between these two characters. It's the central relationship. So it doesn't feel like it's contriving a plot to pull these girls apart or make them realize that they had to outgrow this closeness in order to become more of themselves. No, they just go through a rough patch and come back to one another in the end. And I like that the process of their arc does not involve now and then perfect film. Mm-hmm. There is that, and this is a very true part of coming of age as well. And so I do not think this is invalid at all, but there is that bit of melancholy near the end of Now and Then, where when the girls finally get the treehouse at the end of the movie, and Demi Moore is narrating to us, and she's telling us like, you know, we bought that treehouse because it was supposed to be our place, sort of like together, us against the world. And what happened over the course of that summer was we learned how to be sort of independent of one another. Mm-hmm. Also a vital lesson, learning to be independent and not be codependent, not be totally codependent on you know, relationships in your life. But there's like a sadness to that too, where like part of that coming of age tale was these girls learning to be apart from each other. Whereas in Tragedy Girls, it's these girls learning that each other is where they want to be. Like knowing that and then being reaffirmed in that and coming together after a period of like fighting with one another to be like holding hands in the fucking spooky masks at the school dance at the end. I love that the movie knows that Sadie and Michaela weren't wrong in the first place just because they're fucking crazy for how much they love one another. A thing that is not connected to how fucking crazy they are is their love for each other. And that's just a really nice, inclusive thing that even now feels like a special thing to see in horror. In 2017, felt especially unique. And then when we see it in Jennifer's Body, like back in the aughts, felt like borderline fucking brand new. Even though it wasn't, it still did. So that is what I love about the friendship of Sadie and Michaela. That in the end, it is honored as something that will continue even more strongly than it did before. And not because of the blood pact that they had, but because they're just each other's fucking lobster, man.
I think the thing that's coming up as well in what you're saying is there's like two options, right? Either the girls grow apart, like in Now and Then. By the way, perfect movie.
Perfect movie. I know absolutely you love perfect. Now and Then. I know you love Now and Then.
Listen, if any editors are listening, I've got a book pitch ready to go on Now and Then. I will write 50,000 words on Now and Then. I will. You know I will. You're like,
I'll have it done by end of day.
Literally. Like, perfect movie.
It's been waiting to come out of her.
You know what? You know why it's also perfect? Uncredited Brendan Fraser cameo, but I digress. Like, that is the first time I saw that man, and I have never forgotten the moment. That is akin to Leo coming into frame as Romeo in Romeo plus Juliet. But I digress. Perfect movie. Anyway.
Young Brendan was such a pristine beauty. He's he's a handsome fucking man. But that perfection, that flawlessness, that radiance of youth radiating off of Brendan Fraser. Oof. God.
I cannot. Anyway, the fact that the lesson, as you said, is that the two ones that I wanted to bring up was actually either the girls fall away, so they discover their own individual personalities and the group no longer functions because the group only functioned because they were sort of complementing each other and becoming one full personality.
Yeah.
Here, what I love is that they are both very strong personalities, but they are aligned. They don't necessarily, they're parallel, like I said before, but what they learn at the end of the movie is not that they can it's not that they're not allowed to have or want other things or other relationships, is that ultimately the friendship that they have is their priority. So they choose very consciously and deliberately to prioritize that friendship. Of course, this being a teen slasher film, they make that choice by killing other people. But like you mentioned, that brand of psychopathic crazy actually has nothing to do with their friendship with one another. They kind of sit side by side quite neatly.
Yeah, like the closeness that so often, and again, a genre I love, toxic female friendships. One of the absolute best genres of cinema. Give it to me. And a program that month.
I already did. That was my first programming gig at the BFI.
She is.
It was a season.
She has the priorities.
I insisted. We did screen Now and Then because I would absolutely never fucking allow a female friendship season to happen without Now and Then. And the only listen, if I'm allowed to go in a small digression on my own podcast,
I do it all the time.
That film has been done such a disservice by the home entertainment industry. Fucking every 6 months there is a new Blu-ray edition of Stand By Me. Don't get me wrong, another perfect movie. Right. But there is not a single Blu-ray of Now and Then. And you know what? Even at the British Film Institute, bless the program research people, because we had to screen that from a digibeta. There was no other materials available to screen Now and Then. A perfect film.
I won't take us
in
any
2018
further, but I will say, just as a testament to what you are saying, you know what is coming out that I'm so excited about on Blu-ray, ladies and gentlemen? Fucking Back to the Beach, starring Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello. Back to the Beach from the late 1980s, the reboot of the Beach Blanket Bingo, Frankie and Annette universe.
I mean,
that movie is getting a Blu-ray release.
And yet, Now and Then does not.
Yet, Now and Then does not. Damn, you guys.
Seriously.
That is some bullshit. And I fucking love Back to the Beach. Love Back to the Beach. Psyched for that Blu-ray. That is a shocking comparison to know that Now and Then has not even been given that treatment when I'm about to get Back to the Beach.
Dead.
I take it you have not seen Back to the Beach?
I have not.
I completely get it.
I'm mad about it. You know what also has a bullshit Blu-ray release? Poison Ivy. It fucking deserves better.
That is so... Wow.
Mm-hmm.
This is... You need to turn into your own Second Sight films.
Listen, I love the Second Sight folks. I love them.
Yeah. Yeah, you're an affiliate there. You're part of the gang.
Yes, I mean the second, Chris, if you're listening to this, the second
we're sending it to him.
The second they work on Poison Ivy, I will fold the envelopes myself for that film.
I will drive things to and from printers.
I will handwrite all the program notes if needed, if need be.
Yeah. See, such is the desert we live in. For respect of films revolving around misplaced female intimacy and sincere and loving female intimacy.
Honestly, but I digress. The other thing that I wanted to talk about their friendship is, and you kind of mentioned it briefly, but I think it relates to the moment when this film is also released in 2017, is the fact that Michaela and Sadie are both very overtly, very much obsessed over true crime and horror.
Oh, yeah.
Like to the point where they kidnap a serial killer to use him as a personal trainer, which I kind of love.
And a thing I love, I mean, women I think are like the majority split of like true crime obsessives.
Yes.
Like it's obviously a sensation, but like women, there is a special thing about like true crime fandom for women. And this was before it fully became the true crime industrial complex that it is now. So that was a real savvy thing by Tyler McIntyre to incorporate into this film. It was like, yeah, like take this to its logical extreme, and this is exactly what you get. And the thing I a thing I like a lot too about the dynamic with and just the characters themselves in Michaela and Sadie is that they're very much kids. Like when you watch so many things from the 2000s, you're like, I'm watching a 29-year-old be a child, and
or from the 90s.
Yeah, and like you're like I'm and in the 2000s, it's coming off the tail of like there's that like hypersexual styling, which again, like we're not slut shaming anybody. We're like, be hypersexual, lean into that. I doubt it was the choice of so many of the women rendered on screen at the time to wear necessarily the specific things that they did. But like to watch this and feel like they truly are teenage girls with the, taking seriously the emotions that they're going through and the relationships in their life and the stakes that revolve around those elements. Yes, but at the same time, they feel frivolous in that way. Like they feel styled to be kids. I feel like they do a great job with the sort of like gum popping and snapping aesthetic and attitude between both Michaela and Sadie. And I like that we get to I like that they're, with the closeness that they do have with each other, there is never a framing that would feel disingenuous than the rest of the tone of the film to make them like suddenly out of nowhere erotically interested in each other in a way that would satisfy nothing more than just like seeing two girls touch each other. There is a sort of purity about their love and affection for each other that I find very charming. Actually.
I would add that there is an element though as well that I find quite knowing about the way that they're portrayed is that yes, they're styled and look like either on the younger side of their 20s or like in the very like of age but like 18, 19. And I want to say that probably just because she's like 25 now, I want to say Brianna was probably around 18.
Yeah, Brianna Hildebrand might have been legitimately a child.
Yeah, she might have been like
Brianna Hildebrand, aka BJ Colangelo.
Oh my god, they do look alike.
Yeah, no, and BJ knows I know this, and BJ knows I think this, and I have posted on the internet about this that Brianna Hildebrand is just pixie BJ Colangelo.
But like, there's a moment specifically with Michaela where they're also aware of how the rest of the world looks at them.
Oh,
so, like,
yeah.
I think
they're obsessed with how the world looks at them.
No, but not only in a social media way. I think also there are several scenes in the film where Michaela specifically like turn on the sort of the nymphette aspect.
Yes, Michaela performs it for sure.
I do just want to ask. I really hate the term nymphette, and I think it's like,
God, I haven't heard that one in a while.
It's born out of a really profound misunderstanding of Lolita, and it became a whole thing.
Imagine
in movies.
that, a profound misunderstanding of Lolita.
I know, but it's like it's continued up until now, but also like it's a very specific type of a female killer that has existed in cinema, particularly in the 90s. Poison Ivy being the prime example, The Crush, Alicia Silverstone, Drew Barrymore, and a lot of those are just sexualities projected mostly on the teenage girls, whereas I feel like here, when they're together, when they're by themselves, they do not give off that vibe. They are not aggressively sexual, but they are aware of how the world is ready to look at them, and they're savvy enough to actually play into that role in a way that is comedic and exaggerated and absolutely for laughs and not for titillation.
Oh, I completely agree, and I think that code switching in the way that it is does feel so sincere to being a woman generally. But like being a teen girl who maybe isn't considering the implications of, the sort of monkey's paw effect of maybe manipulating your presentation and your persona in a way that gets you the attention that you perhaps think you want or sincerely do want, or that like you just need. That feels like such a really spot on teen girl element to incorporate into something like this, and it feels sincere in the way that they write the characters. It doesn't feel like the performance is for the director to jack off to, because he just wanted to watch the dailies and see his actors like turn on the sex kitten move in these scenes because that's working for him personally. Just feels like it's part of the characters that would really happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not like when you watch an Eli Roth movie and you're just like, oh, he just does these things because he wants his fantasy in front of him.
Or that whole gang, to be honest.
Yeah, which like he's full on. He's in like print. Having said, like, the great thing about shooting an exploitation movie is the exploitation. Like, you know, I forget which one it was, but there's a shot of like girls jumping on trampolines, basically, and literally. And he said something like, again, it's a quote he gave to the press of being like, "Yeah, we had the shot. I just kept rolling because it's fucking sweet to see girls jumping on trampolines." It's like, thanks, director, who's in charge of a professional environment that is making a film and is responsible for the safety of the people in your charge. That's cool.
Thanks, bud. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good work.
That is not what Tragedy Girls feels like.
No. And going back to their obsession with true crime and horror, it never gets to Scream levels of meta-referential. Like they mentioned, they sort of drop in certain titles. They drop in martyrs. They have a serial killer diorama, which I found adorable. And it's very much the vibe of a lot of kind of YouTube essays that I regularly watch, that are mostly made by women who are like, let's talk about Jeffrey Dahmer. It's like, yes, but also with cute animations, please. Thank you very much. But what I did want to ask you about is like the thing that's interesting that does feel a little bit meta and also quite original, perhaps, might be wrong, is that they're desperate for attention, right? And that's how they're using or attempting to use social media. But also they don't want to be bystanders. They don't want to be commentators. They want to be a part of the story. And they want to be seen as the final girls. But they are also aware that in order to make that happen, they need to do the killing, because the killing won't just appear around them and make them the final girls. So what do you think about the
killing,
fact that,
in fact, will just not happen?
No, like, you know, if you want to get something done, do it yourself.
Exactly.
Like, definitely don't wait for a man to do it for you. Like, you're going to be waiting for fucking ever. But also,
yes, you are.
What do you think about the way that then this teen slasher works? Because we're both meant to be like rooting for them to get all the social media followers that they want, and also rooting for them to kill people, because that's how they're going to get it.
Which is like, it's such a perfect, like, this movie in that regard specifically, it's such a perfect, like, the case for horror movies, because it's like, it's an objectively terrible thing, and we see what, like, we see in real life what the meat market of that kind of attitude about generating attention built on the back of tragedy at any cost. We see what that looks like. We see the effect of it. And so it shouldn't be something we can delight in. And yet, when you watch it, you get to not have to take your medicine for a while. You get to not have to take your medicine for a while. And it's just really fun to watch the worst people imaginable revel in the exact kind of, like, horseshit, superficial, like, navel-gazing, clout-chasing trash that we should all, like, be against and think is repugnant and amoral. And we get to root for characters that are just, like, shitty attention whores. And it's great. It is great to root for girls who, like, in a fictional setting, want attention so bad they're gonna, like, lay waste to people to get it. And that sounds horrible, but so is the fucking world. And it's just, when you get to give yourself over to the repugnance, it is just like going on a little roller coaster ride. And it's nice to be able to enjoy Vice at a distance in that way. And I will, like, but they're both doing such a bang up job in this movie. These are excellent. This is a fun movie. It's a clever premise. It's well executed. But this movie lives and dies on the charisma of Alexandra Shipp and, oh my God, just Brianna Hildebrand.
Yeah.
Brianna Hildebrand as Sadie is so fucking perfect in this movie. Her attitude, the way she moves, sets her mouth, the way she moves her eyebrows. I mean, she's the teen dream. Deal with it. Like, that kind of fucking level of bitch. Like, these girls are hatched from the eggs of that were laid by Jawbreaker. And that makes it such a wonderful thing to, like, I miss the jawbreaker sensibility often. And I wonder, like, Anna, do you feel like we're returning to that kind of a meanness in horror?
Well, I was actually wondering upon rewatch of this film, the Jawbreaker, Heather's, Mean Girls vibe of it all.
Uh-huh.
I think that's so much more difficult. It's as difficult to achieve proper, excellent meanness as it is to achieve earnestness. Without being corny and without being tacky. And I enjoy the shit out of Tragedy Girls. But upon rewatch, I gotta admit, it did feel a tiny bit forced.
Okay.
The meanness,
please say more.
The meanness felt forced because I think it needs to be timeless, if you know what I mean. It either needs to be super niche and specific of this is a mean girl that could only exist in 2004, or this is a mean girl that is universally mean. And I think it's the fact that I think the thing that makes it unsuccessful in those is because is the whole social media of it all.
Okay.
It's because
do you think there would have been a way around that, or is it inherent to the reliance on social media as a premise that it couldn't stand up to time?
Well, this is the thing. I think because social media has moved so quickly, and especially the discourse and the style of creator that has become popular, the way that they speak to camera, the way that they say things, it's basically aging as we speak. There's probably a new way of doing things by the time we finish recording this episode. So that is the element that I think has really like placed them in a time that doesn't necessarily make it either so specific that they feel of a very particular moment, because it feels too broad stroke social media. It doesn't even feel native to YouTube. It doesn't feel native to TikTok. It's essentially,
that is a very good point.
It's essentially like watching Scream 4, which I really enjoy, but like it does not belong in our comprehension of online speak or of online creators or even kind of horror commentators online. Because it's sort of, it's too broad strokes to be specific to a time. And it's too specific to the internet as a concept to function as a universal, timeless meanness, if that makes sense. So it's
interesting.
It's trying to do both, but in trying to attempt both, it doesn't succeed in either.
Do you think, was there, and that's another thing where like, do you think that is a result of perhaps not a detailed enough investigation of social media, perhaps, so as to just sort of demonize it in broad strokes? Or is that because in 2017, was that where we were? In 2017 was that, I don't know, was there a way around that in 2017 to nail it in the way you're talking about? Because the answer could very well be no. I don't know, because our understanding of the intricacies of these things has advanced. This is a fascinating conversation.
Okay, so and I'm thinking of my feed here, but I'm thinking of films that have that successfully feel of a time, and films that kind of tackle social media, right? So I'm thinking of Ingrid Goes West. From a few years ago. Yeah. But the thing where I think it fails, and I'm thinking of other sort of tech themed or social media themed horror films like hashtag horror, which I've spoken about on this podcast, and is like very underseen and very weird and problematic in some ways, but also kind of a very interesting non-capsule of social media. And in the same way as this film, Tragedy Girls, it does not name anything, which is what makes it impossible for it to be timed. Whereas Ingrid Goes West is specifically about Instagram. And like Unfriended, for example, is very much a time capsule because it's very Skype heavy, very Facebook heavy. Those platforms belong in a particular time frame of the cultural lifespan of the internet, right? When you try to go generic, generic generic, the interwebs, generic hashtag Tragedy Girls, hashtag follow us, or whatever the shit that they say. There was a time where people spoke like that. There was a time where people used those expressions unironically and kind of use hashtags all over the place. That did happen. but it happened in particular platforms in particular ways. Trying to allude to them without making it explicit what it is that you're talking about kind of betrays either misunderstanding or misallocation of internet speak and internet culture, or it's trying to be so broad strokes so as to not age the film, but by doing that, it makes it impossible to connect to it from an internet perspective, if that makes sense. Because if you're appealing to a younger audience who've been brought up in internet speak and have evolved with internet culture as internet culture has also evolved, then this means nothing. Whether a singer goes west, it's like, yeah, I recognize the pinks, I recognize the hearts, I recognize what it looks like when you get over 50 likes in a really short space of time on Instagram. I recognize the design of the logo from when it looked in this particular way. It's like, it is specific and not shying away from the culture that emanates from a particular platform in a particular moment of time. Because this is trying to be so broad. It's like, I know that they're being YouTubers, but I'm not seeing the interface. And the way that they're creating the content seems kind of strangely not coherent with the history of YouTube. So it doesn't fit in internet culture, if that makes sense.
This is really, I feel like what a fascinating aspect of this to me is that you have something with, going, not to pull Jennifer's body. I didn't mean to get into Jennifer's body again, but that movie was so lambasted at the time in part because of the very Diablo Cody speak of the dialogue. It was like, people don't talk like this, or this, you can just hear the creator coming through it so much. It doesn't feel realistic, or it's so over the top that you can't even sort of surrender yourself to the environment because you can't connect to it at all. But what I think that ultra specificity of Diablo Cody speak accomplishes in the long run is that it makes it almost it transcends time, because actually that wasn't how people talked in 2009. No. Like, that wasn't even how necessary all of Devil's Kettle talked. It was how Jennifer spoke. Yeah. And as a result of her proximity to Jennifer, it was Needy awkwardly incorporated some things that Jennifer would say into her own vernacular, and it would always kind of have a hitch about it because it sounded funny when Needy said it. But it is, I think, allowed the film to age better because there was that extreme detail to it.
It's the same way as Heathers. It's the same way as Heathers. The Heathers speak doesn't belong to a particular era. It's not how people spoke in 1989. It's not how people spoke ever. But that's what allowed it to be sort of timeless by design, right? It's the extreme specificity. And this is what I mean with Tragedy Girls and with kind of social media focused horror in general. Like, you either commit to a moment in time of the internet, or make it so specific that it actually exists in its own different plane of internet speak. And because it's trying to just be too broad, just generally screens, videos, hashtags, it kind of that part is the thing that doesn't quite gel for me, that seems to be trying too hard. Whether it's like, if it went super, super, super niche and specific, and it's like in their little whatever town in the Midwest, they just had a completely unique language and way of speaking, and they had this specific platform that they use because, I don't know, they couldn't clear the rights for like Instagram or something like that. Fine, but then make it ultra niche so that you do exist in that otherworldly space that Heather's and Jennifer's body exist. But it's trying to do that by the way that they speak, the way that they especially speak to other people when they're kind of in their natural, real personalities and not performing being the nice girls or the president of the student association or like the victims for the public's eyes. Yeah. Because they're doing all of these different performances, right? Which I found really, really fun to watch and really interesting, because when you see them switch to themselves, it's hilarious because we're in on it. Like, we know the stuff that they're doing and how morbid they really are. And that's that's got that kind of Ginger Snaps vibe to it.
Yeah. No, that is, Ginger Snaps is a really good invocation on that one too, because that having like nothing to, there was a technologized aspect in like chat room, early social media kind of speak to Jennifer that feels like the way white gays on the internet talk now. Whereas watching totally outside of that social media context, like late 90s, early 2000s with Ginger Snaps, there is such a specificity about the way that Ginger and Bridget communicate with each other that watching that movie even now, it makes the world of their own feel so
complete. Totally.
That it's like, oh, this wasn't like how we talked in the 90s. It was how Ginger and Bridget talked to each other in their weird little corner of like Canadian isolation.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So that's the one part where I think it fails. I think I understand, and the thing that's really well performed and well written is their need and desire for attention, which is the thing that unites them as friends. And this is also why their friendship trips up, right? It's because they get distracted from the goal.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
They start wanting different things for a little bit before they come back together.
Before they start in murder and they come back together in murder.
Yeah, exactly.
It's such a, because it's a movie that it had a sensation around it at the time. Tragedy Girls. And
I was going to ask you, because like I can't remember, I watched a screener somehow. I tried to screen this film actually several times in the UK and consistently hit a wall because it never got released here. I think it played one festival, maybe a couple festivals, but yeah, that's it. It never really got traction in the UK. So what was it like in the US?
It wasn't like, you know, a takeover of media by any stretch of the imagination, but it was one of those things like I remember the year it came out, like you just kept hearing about it sort of like in an indie circles festival context. Like and Tragedy Girls. Like it felt like one of those sneaky things that you would expect to see on the end of every best of list at the end of every year's best of list, because it would be like everybody who had been murmuring about Tragedy Girls all year long was finally going to like put it in wax, and you were going to have it sort of like consecrated this little indie movie that could doing girl horror at a time when like girl horror wasn't necessarily proliferating, and from a point of view of like, you know, in the tradition of Heathers, in the tradition of a Jennifer's Body, in the tradition of a Mean Girls kind of thing. But the afterlife of Tragedy Girls has been interesting to me because I feel like there is a sentiment. Is this how you felt about it? Here's the question. Mm-hmm. Did you trip on its broadness in its conversation about social media at the time you watched it? Or is this something in looking at it now, you're like, oh, I see how that was a thing that worked in the immediate, but doesn't at this point?
Definitely on rewatch. Definitely on rewatching it literally today for this podcast is when I noticed it. And I think it might be because I haven't rewatched it since I originally saw it in 2017 or 18, around that time. And also there's been the way that social media, texting, and kind of people's need for attention online has shifted so much, both in real life and online, and also in the way that it's depicted in movies. Like, I even remember that at one time we thought that Jason Reitman's like Men, Women, and Children was an original or good portrayal of social media and how it affects people.
Totally.
Like, we had some learning to do, and that learning had to coincide with the evolution of our relationship with the internet in general. And obviously everything has been shifted because of the Panini. So like definitely on rewatch. So, and because now I've seen so many, and there's been so many integrations and examples of exploring, even within the subgenre of like toxic female friendship movies.
Yes.
Even within that subgenre, there's been interesting kind of social media specific or internet specific portrayals that work really, really well. And it just kind of, it made me look at this aspect of the film in a different light.
And I asked that because I think there had, like, it's not like a movie that has fallen out of favor, but now that we're talking about it, I am thinking about, like, I have been surprised as somebody who, because I feel like the central friendship, I think, to me, the central relationship between Michaela and Sadie, it holds up to me. I enjoy it as much as I did when I saw it at the time. And so that's the part that I always go back to. But I do feel like this is a movie that I have been surprised to find a chorus of people for whom rewatch value was, for them, like, kind of surprisingly low. Like, not like, wow, I hate this movie now, but with distance from it coming out, with distance from 2017, feeling like they were not as enamored of it upon later watches down the line as they were when they first saw it. You are not the first example of a person I have heard say this. This is I'm fascinated by this suddenly.
And the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, and of course, I'm bringing it all back to the teenness of it all, because after all, it is the teen horror season. And I think this is also one of the things that has kind of lowered the rewatchability factor for me. Is I know that there's so many conventions around teen movies, and especially American teen movies, and kind of the milieu and the setting of high school. I don't know if the high school dynamics of this entirely work. Again, because the tapping into too many tropes without creating any new ones.
It's a tropes clearinghouse. It is certainly a tropes clearinghouse.
But there is no additional one. You know you know what I mean? Like sometimes the most successful, certainly some of the most memorable high school movies, whether horror or not that we can remember, sort of add something. They have all the tropes and then they add a new. It's like, in Scream, Randy is the new addition. Randy is the horror obsessed meta voice of reason in a way.
Yeah.
That we add, like, that character should not be memorable, but it is, because we kind of never really quite seen someone like that who is essentially narrating the movie back to us as the movie is happening. And like, I'm, even if we go back even more, like someone like fucking James Spader in Pretty in Pink. Like,
no,
we've
like,
always had douchey jocks, but we've never had a douche who also really desperately wants to fuck the protagonist and tries to neg her into fucking him. Like, we've never had a sexy douche like that. Like, I don't think I've
ever been so attracted to a bad guy as I have been.
Literally.
Spader, man.
I mean, and sometimes they're really subtle. Or like even people like Ferris Bueller. Like we're never really supposed to root for the slacker who lies to everyone and is kind of an asshole. But the entire movie makes us root for him.
Making Sloane's life harder.
Yeah. And in Heathers, we're rooting for a girl who is basically enabling and sleeping with a murderer for the entire movie. And it does work. Like and it's an evolution of the mean girl trope in Heathers. Yeah. So like there's always the everything we like, all the ingredients that we like, and then like a surprise ingredient that's just gonna elevate the salad. It's like it's like the sprinkling of
really innovative dressing.
It's like not the dressing, it's the nuts. It's like you make a really good salad and then you add some roasted walnuts. Finisher. Yes, it's the crunchy finisher. It's either the like clusters of flaxseed or it's the roasted sunflower seeds or walnuts.
Candied walnut. I love this.
It's my favorite thing to compare all movies to food, Jordan.
No, that's what you say is completely true. Of like, I'm thinking now of like Clueless. It was a Shakespeare adaptation, and it created this fanciful world where in the 90s we loved rich people, and the rich people were going to save us. So we loved rich people, and so like it was entering this world of rich people with this hyper real style. Watching Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. Like, they're killing they accidentally kill the babysitter. Well, they don't kill the babysitter, but she dies. But like, to watch Sue Ellen become a working woman and her clothes and her fashion and her style, like, that is inextricable from sort of like the everlasting power of, right on top of that, Rose, of Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. Obviously, Bring It On. Like, it is similarly to like a Diablo Cody speak, a Mark and Daniel Waters speak in Heathers. We have this insular language that you watch now, and it's such like a beloved sort of Christmas card to the time that it was made. And you're right. The Tragedy Girls is sort of amorphous in that way, which like I think it really speaks to its there's a kind of genius to doing something that fits so perfectly in its moment, that is truly such a piece of candy that it really does dissolve in water. But you liked it so much for those few seconds that it was like rolling around in your mouth. Like it like that in and of itself, like to make a movie that can sweep people up and have so little staying power, perhaps for so many. And I think it all underscores too, saying before, like how good Alexandra Shipp and Brianna Hildebrand are in this movie, because of the way that this movie does stick for me is 100% revolves around how fully embodied these characters are by these two actresses. I think it is a testament to perhaps two performances that don't get enough credit in a movie that maybe got more credit than it should have gotten for its cleverness, with its tongue in its cheek, because it was, you know, borrowing largely from many other things. And I say that as a fan of it.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very, I'm not normally, I'm a cheerleader. I love being a cheerleader. And it's always a healthy exercise for me to find the things that don't succeed with people that I actually trust, to, like yourself, to bring those criticisms to the fore, where it's not just like people bitching on the fucking internet. It's not just film journalists.
No, and don't get me wrong. I really like Tragedy Girls.
Yeah.
And I deeply enjoyed watching it. I do, and I definitely think there's things that change depending on the time when they're released, the context in which we watch them, and you know how, you know, a movie can be good and be not rewatchable. And also you cannot rewatch, you cannot divorce, I think, a film, especially, you know, the subgenre of teen movies, of horror movies, of teen horror movies, of girl horror movies, from the context. You know, like, you know, you've spoken as the world's foremost scholar on Jennifer's Body, of just how important the context for that film's original failure and its subsequent success is. Like, and for instance, like, the internet cannot be divorced from the reclamation of Jennifer's Body. And I do find it really interesting to, like, think about these films. And the other thing is, like, some films that you see at festivals are great in that like, great with a capital G, in that particular space. Like, the criticism or the way that we speak about certain films, the hype and the buzz of a festival cannot be separated from, you know, how people speak about film initially. And those, you know, those initial festival reviews, all those things, like, they do live on, but it doesn't mean that opinion is necessarily the most considered, or even, like, it might be considered for the time, and then some time passes and you recontextualize your own opinion. That's also fine. I almost, like,
sometimes I feel like films should almost need to be re-reviewed, like, after 5 to 10 years after they come out, to, like, accurately reflect a critical aggregate score, because it's like,
well, you're expecting too much of film criticism then, because mostly, you know, you know, the art of criticism is in the debate and the conversation, and, you know, the exploring and teasing apart of ideas that are contained by a piece of art, in this case a film, not a star or number rating or percentage. So, like, you're asking too much, Jordan.
It's just, like, thinking of the Aughts Pod and how, you know, our whole reason for being on that podcast is to talk about the unjustly maligned horror cinema of the 2000s that I watch now, and I'm truly like, I'm sorry, what were you wanting that wasn't here? Like, looking at, like, not that everything deserves to be 100%, but, like, the idea of things that have, like, a fucking 10% or something. It's like, no, really, guys, what did you want the roommate to be?
Well, I think, like, you've just hit that, and again, this is another digression. I do apologize, but I think it's so interesting because you've hit the nail on the head on something that's a bedbug of mine, with a lot of criticism in general. And I don't mean any one particular critic or anything like that. I've probably done this myself multiple times, and I try to catch myself when I do it. You're meant to be talking and reviewing and criticizing and critiquing the thing that you're watching, not the thing that you would like it to be.
Certainly so, yeah.
And the amount of times that I read in reviews is like, well, it could have been this, or it should have been that, or it should have tried to be this other thing. I was like, yes, babe, but also I love dream casting, but doesn't make me a casting director. You know, nobody's fucking listening to me about, like, who I think should be cast as Lestat. But, like, it's still fun to do, but just it doesn't mean it's casting.
It's why I think Angelica Jade Bastien is such, like, an important critical voice, because she really does meet the work, I think, for what it's doing, but also holds it up to the standard of what it could be within its own framework. And I think she does such a beautiful job of demanding more without going into movies having a whole conception of what they were going to be before she got there. I think she brings such an art to criticism in that way. That doesn't feel just like bitching and complaining.
I mean, we've spoken about this, you know, for a fact that I, like, stan Angelica's work so much.
We thinking people should.
But yeah, there's that, and I think the value of rewatching things, especially when talking about them or especially when writing about them, is that our own contexts change and our own ideas change.
Yeah.
Or, hopefully they do.
Hopefully,
ideally.
yeah,
Hopefully people are not
truly.
static. So, like, that's why it's also interesting. Like, the way that I watched Tragedy Girls, I remember, even if I don't remember specifically where, I definitely watched it in a link, but not at, like, a physical festival. But it's also a moment when, like, the final girls themselves were just barely a year old. So the context of, watching and experiencing, like, girl horror and female-centric horror was so fresh and exciting that, you did demand a lot less from it. Whereas what I would demand from a film like Tragedy Girls now is completely changed and shifted.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly for, like, teen movies. They have also shifted and changed. And the other thing is, like, the Molly Haskell quote that I really love going back to is, there's the movie that exists and there's your memory of the movie that you watch.
Yeah.
And they're two different things.
That
so,
is
like,
extremely
sometimes in rewatching something and reconsidering your original opinion or memory of it, in reconsidering your original opinion of it, you're also reconsidering your memory of it. And sometimes it's okay to, like something, but not be in love with it anymore.
I think that is a perfect encapsulation of sort of, like, the festival effect.
Yes.
And, like, I remember when Emily Yoshida saw Us at when it, I think it was, like, the secret screening or, like, the surprise screening at South by Southwest when it first showed for audiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember her tweeting about being like, the vibe in this room is so fucking high frequency right now. Like, I don't even know how to think. And like, that was going into the start of the movie. She was very aware of just this, like, propulsive energy at the thought of Jordan Peele's follow-up to Get Out. Mm-hmm. Felt like a concert environment.
Yeah.
And then when it ended, she gave just, like, a sentence of a thought, but then was like, I can't actually, like, put my thoughts together about this fully or write my review until I get distance from the room that I just saw it in. So I'm going to hold off on actually contributing anything else, because she just knew she couldn't divorce what she was going to say from the space in which she watched the movie.
And the other thing is, like, and again, we were just talking about this all before hitting record, but I've literally just come back from the Cannes Film Festival late last night. Yeah. And, like, it's a perfect pressure cooker, right? But it also depends on what you're looking at the films for in that environment. I think that matters so much, because I was going there with a dual mission as both press and a film programmer. So, like, the vibe is important when you're programming, because you are looking for audiences and you're thinking about audiences and you're thinking about how a film will play in a room. And the room in Cannes is not going to be the same room as Fantastic Festival. It's not going to be the same room as the BFI. It's not going to be the same room as the Edinburgh Film Festival. So, like, you consider all those things and you judge from the vibe. But then when you're thinking just as a critic, it's what you're talking about, Emily. It's like, you do have to go and think about things, but very often you can't. Like, I had to write a review of Elvis within an hour of watching it, and I filed it within an hour and a half of finishing the film. And, like, of course I'm going to revisit that film, and my experience will have changed, and my opinion will have changed, or will have, marinated a bit more. Even, like, a day after, it marinated a bit more. So, like, you do it. The opinions that you put out into the world about a film, or that you have for yourself, are so infected by the vibe of the festival and the vibe of that room in particular, which is why all those fucking reports of walkouts, vomiting, and even standing ovations, listen, they matter, but they matter for a specific purpose. Yeah. And they don't matter that much.
I mean, kind of any round of applause stops mattering when you hit, like, you exceed 5 minutes. It's well, now we're just stroking.
I can't remember who tweeted it, but someone who was like, the breathless reports of, like, a 12-minute standing ovation for Close at the Cannes Film Festival. I'm like, who's counting them? How do you know?
Yeah,
Is there a counter that comes on?
Yeah, is there a designated stopwatch keeper at Cannes? Is it Thierry himself?
I haven't seen anyone keep track of the standing ovations, and I've been a part of some, and I'm like, the energy as well. I remember watching And Then They Danced at Cannes a few years ago. Have you seen the Georgian dance movie?
I've not seen that.
Oh, Jordan, you would love that film.
Okay.
Absolutely love
I know you love a dance movie.
I love a dance movie. This is very public knowledge. But it's a queer dance movie set in Georgia. Oh. You're gonna fucking love it. Okay. Anyway, there was a standing ovation that felt so unbelievably heartfelt and just grateful and honest and like tearful at the end of that movie that I still remember it. Like, I don't know how fucking long it went for. Like, it could have been 2 minutes. It could have been 20. I don't know. Right. It was a good vibe. Everybody enjoyed the movie. The people who didn't left, the people who loved it stayed up. They applauded and wanted the filmmakers to feel that warmth from the audience.
Yeah,
that's why it matters. Like, it also changes the experience of the filmmakers are in the crowd with you, or if they're not.
Yeah.
Nobody has a standing ovation for a film when there's no one from the film present.
That is an extremely good point. That is an extreme, and you know what? And if you do, that's the real testament. If people cannot help but get on their feet and applaud when fucking no one is there to clap for, that's when you know it's truly transcendent.
Truly.
That's when you know it's Promising Young Woman, motherfucker.
Oh my goodness. So, Jordan, what else can we talk about? What else can we say about this film?
You know, it's like I think Tyler McIntyre did a good job with this movie. But I still, it makes me wonder, like, the idea of, like, what you said, like, what you would ask of it in 2022. What would a woman in 2022 do with Tragedy Girls, kind of thing? Like, I went and saw The Watcher recently. Outstanding. And we walked out of it, and I was with Sam among many others, and he goes, "Thank God a woman wrote this." Like, he was just so he was just so relieved that it was in those hands, particularly as you're racing toward the finale. And then he went and saw a movie the next day that also dealt with women's stuff. And he texted me after he saw it and was like, you just talk about being aware that a movie was written and directed by a man. And it is fascinating. It's amazing to be in a time where we have finally sort of the luxury, it feels like, and it does feel like a luxury of being able to say, like, oh God, I like, if only a woman could have written it and it could be like this movie that I just saw, instead of being like, if only a woman wrote this and it could be like a movie I saw in the fucking 90s sort of situation. Like, it does feel like the wish for a woman or a queer person or just like a non cisgendered individual to be at the helm of something doesn't feel like a fantasy wish anymore. It sort of kind of is still, but it doesn't feel as much like when you say it, you're talking about a dragon guarding gold. Like, it talks about something that exists in, like, this mortal plane of conversation. So, like, what, like, is part of that broad generalization of the cultural, of the social media aspect of it, is that actually, like, a sort of, because generally when things don't have enough detail or they're not fleshed out enough, it's kind of because things aren't being taken seriously enough to have more thought put into them. So it's like, is this, and so much of, and this is a teen girl story, and there is so much care given to Michaela and Sadie, but it does feel like sort of like a girl's concern, like social media attention and clout chasing and things like that. Is it flippantly done, or is it dashed off because it's just like one of those silly things that girls worry about?
I don't think it is. I don't think it's dashed off. I think the fact that it's given the preoccupation and the weight of, you know, the same as applying to college and going to college. Like, they see it as professionals. They look at it.
You're right.
They are doing a Gale Weathers. They are taking that sort of like, no, we're gonna do this, fuck everyone else. Like, that's kind of one of the core principles of their friendship too. They are aligned on this. Like, they know they have the tools and the ambition and the drive to, like, do the thing that they really want to do. And, like, fuck if everyone thinks they're morbid or whatever. They get told off as well by people. They get looked at weird. You know, they're sort of never suspected, but they are sort of off-putting to people because of that drive. And I think that's what proves to me that it's not kind of senseless or thrown away. And it's not so much about attention, it's ambition. And I think ambition is often like, especially female ambition, is camouflaged as superficial or a vanity project, but that has to do with much deeper ingrained misogyny than it has to do with like what their ambition manifests as. Because they could be, they could want to be surgeons. And they would also be just as like creepy and sociopathic and murderous, because we haven't even talked about the murders. The fact that Craig Robinson gets murdered by a Smith machine, I found particularly hilarious.
Yeah, the kills, the whole like cutting the body into pieces, Craig Robinson's death. Like, this movie has excellent violence in it.
But the question that I wanted to start kind of ending on is, what did this movie give, or what does this movie tell us about the state of teen horror at this stage in the late 2010s?
Because I feel like we're in a bit of, I feel like we're having a slasher moment.
We are.
Or at this time. And I feel like this movie is actually coming in perhaps when that is being ushered in earnest, like, because horror is surging at the time. Horror is gaining traction among I think broader mainstream movie fan base than had maybe previously paid it attention, because I think the most recent, most popular brand of horror behind what happens with Get Out and The Babadook and Goodnight Mommy, et cetera, all those movies that always get tossed out. The thing that is people have had to like mouthwash from is the torture season that came in the 2000s. That if that alienated you from, sleepover horror that you like enjoyed in the 90s or the 80s, how many people do we know who are like, I don't like I just don't like the torture porn. Like, how do you, well, I don't really watch horror. Like, I'm not really into that torture stuff, because there is a synonymousness. There's a synonymous nature between the two, when it couldn't be further from the truth. But I think people are coming back into the fold that may have been previously alienated from it, or they're feeling more adventurous to experiment because something like a Get Out has made them feel more safe, or something like The Witch has made them feel like it's not a waste of their time and this is a work of substance and art. And I think at around 2017 as well, this is when we're getting Happy Death Day from Chris Landon. And so there is a sort of shot in the arm, and I think Tragedy Girls does do this very well, to the framework of the slasher. The last most recent slasher wave that we see before this is the remake boom of the 2000s, where, barring anything about like gore or substance or whatever, we're seeing all these old properties trotted out and revived. So there's a lot of slashers coming in the 2000s, but they're largely maligned movies consigned to the waste bin. Not with me and Sam having our say about it now, they're not. But I think this movie is, with that renaissance of thoughtful horror that people are realizing exists, and it is coming at the same time as a wave of like really good time horror that is bringing people back in who maybe haven't engaged much since the sort of Scream era, and this is making them feel fun and good about watching a slasher movie again, in the way that there was nothing like feel good about slashers in the 2000s. Everything was saturated colors and sweaty like a Michael Bay movie, because he was producing so many of these films, and it was boobs and boot cuts and bleached hair and bronzer and flat irons. And I think people are being sort of like beckoned back in to watching horror cinema, because it's starting to feel fun again in a way that is divorced from the nihilism of the most recent wave of that kind of scary movie that happened in the 2000s. Now, ghost movies at this point had been happening for years at this point, thanks to, yet again, the reinvention of the genre by Leigh Whannell and James Wan, with things like Insidious, and then crystallizing in that style with The Conjuring. Like, they brought the ghost movie home, movies like The Others, making it like real credible art to watch this kind of stuff. But here now we're picking up, and it's like, guys, but we can have fucking fun again too. And that's carried forth with sort of Blumhouse taking up the torch with sort of the party horror genre that they really love, and that they love to do, and Blumhouse becoming a sort of household name in its way in the film industry, and particularly among genre fans. I feel like Tragedy Girls is at the tip of the spear
Mm-hmm.
for what's happening in the slasher right now. And I think that's a part of the excitement that greeted it when it came out, was that it was like, oh, it's not just taking old movies, redoing them, and giving them to us at like a high polish and higher budget. I feel like it's doing the thing that Scream did and that Cabin in the Woods did to make me feel like, you know, if I'm going to be a snob about it, that I'm engaging with popcorn horror that also has commentary to it and substance to it and like a current eye for pop culture to it.
You've just given us a whirlwind tour of the evolution of horror in the 2010s.
It all just came boiling over at that moment. Did that sound right? Does that pass the smell test to you?
It does. And also it just convinces me once more to like bully you into writing a book.
I constantly just have so much to say. You're absolutely right.
So much.
And I should and I would like to.
Yes. Editors, please commission Jordan to write a whole ass book about a horror in the 2010s.
Anna, is Tragedy Girls a bridge of a teen movie then? Is it like a bridge between times of a teen movie?
The thing
or
that you
is
mentioned,
it representative of our present in like a 2022 in a recognizable way?
No, I don't think it's representative of our present at all.
Okay, my kind of thought was no, and so I want to hear where you were going.
What I think in the way that you've described it, like it's very hard for something to break out and become like a culture wave, right?
Oh God.
Which is why, you know, things like Get Out, things like, you know, even I would argue like Saw is a cultural shift.
Yes.
The one else Saw. I'd say Insidious, The Conjuring are massively successful, influential in the genre, but they're not cultural shifts in the way that Saw was.
I hear you.
Even though, you know, I'm a massive fan of both of those filmmakers, so like I'm not disparaging them, I'm just talking about the influence. And whenever something like that happens, like Hostel is very much part of a moment, but it's not a cultural shift.
Yeah.
So I think that Tragedy Girls, in the same vein, is part of a moment, but it is not important enough to shift the horror dial. It is, and it's not important enough to shift the teen dial either. You know, whether it's something like, it's not horror, but it is teen associated, the series Sex Education is a shift.
Right.
Is a massive cultural shift in the way that teens are portrayed in film and TV, right? Because they're kind of interchangeable now. The distribution methods have collapsed.
Totally.
Vlad, you are not a teenager. You are a senile cat. Shut up.
You are a senile cat.
My point being that it's not a victim or necessarily a precursor. It just came around at a time where those things were just starting to crystallize.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, I don't know, kind of influential enough to shift a dial after it. But it's not reductive in the way that it's like saying something that's already been said a million times.
You know what? It feels like this movie feels like it is on, and it does sit actually like on this threshold, so that makes sense. It is a movie just before we were about to be like, everything is queer. It's like, it's a movie. It's like,
okay,
it was like,
I think I found a sentence to crystallize it. It is a movie very much of its time, but doesn't necessarily say anything about its time.
That is true. That is true. And it is right. It is nailing its moment, but its moment is right before the conversation. And it's so close to it that it's like it evokes a more intersectional conversation around horror without actually participating in that.
Yes.
Which makes it feel, I don't think this movie doesn't fulfill its promise. I think it is so, by proximity, so close to more potential that we would soon demand that it can feel like it does not necessarily live up to a promise that it wasn't making because of just like actually how much in the sandbox of that like horror diversity intersectionality 2.0 that we're very much, I think, kind of forcing the issue on right now, the people who fucking care about it. And like, because there's such an almost queer sensibility about this movie, but it's not actually a queer movie. It's in the way that horror of the 90s, because it was being written prolifically by so many queer gay male screenwriters, is implicitly so gay, but is explicitly, of course, not allowed to be. This movie feels like if it if it was more gay or something, and not necessarily even because Sadie and Michaela themselves need to be like involved in that manner. I don't think that's true at all. Like women can be friends without, being something different, or being something more physically involved in that friendship. I will be the first to attest to that. But it does. It feels, now that I'm talking about it, like it is this bridge movie between that sort of fun cruelty of the 2000s. It is post the nihilism of the 2000s, but incorporating the fun cruelty of it. But progressive conversation horror, but it is dancing so close to the edge of it that it feels like it is between two conversations about horror, like you said, without actually participating in either of them, which is a fascinating product of its time. Like 2019 Tragedy Girls looks entirely different. And not that like every movie doesn't look different this time, but we're talking like even 2 years difference. 18 months difference. 2019 Tragedy Girls, 2015 Tragedy Girls, 2014 Tragedy Girls. That's a different look entirely at a heroine's doing fucked up shit in horror situation. Because in 2013, we still fucking get Texas Chainsaw 3D. My personal favorite Texas Chainsaw.
Listen, I will not besmirch this season. I will not besmirch this conversation, Jordan, with talk of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3D. No, sir.
I will hear no disparagement of the heroic performance that Alexandra Daddario gives me. Double stick tape has never worked harder, and maybe neither has Alex Daddario, an actress I deeply enjoy.
Jordan,
anybody can be good in a good movie, man. To be good in Texas Chainsaw 3D, that's putting in the fucking work, my friends.
Jordan, it is always a pleasure and always an illuminating pleasure at that to talk to you.
I really forced you to answer more questions this time because I always like whenever it ends, you're always like kind of interviewing me, and I think of all of our talks as just conversations, and then I'm like, oh, I didn't hear what Anna had to say. And so this time I really forced the issue by asking you more questions.
Hey, I enjoy being put on the spot on my own show. It's all good. You always make me think.
I do think another nod I do want to give to Tragedy Girls, and this is something I've been thinking a lot about lately with the Scream franchise, is that there doesn't have to only be one.
Yes.
There doesn't have to only be one. There does not have to be a single survivor girl. She does not have to persist alone. These are both the villains and the heroines of the story. But like the thing that I find, Scream is my favorite horror franchise for sure. I fucking love it. Best characters ever. And with time passing and with more and more Screams coming in and now new iteration Screams coming out, I maybe the single thing that I appreciate most about the franchise is not only is two things. One, that Sydney is superior in strength and survivability to any ghost face. Any fucker could be behind the mask, but Sydney will always survive. And that the movies have, and I hope they don't come back for 6 because I don't want anything bad to happen to them. I want them to retire into the good night. And be safe and okay, Gale and Sydney. But what means so much to me about the franchise as it goes on is that Sydney never had to be the only one because she had Dewey and Gale. And Gale never had to be nicer than she was because Sydney was always there to be the nice girl. Sydney is quite vanilla. And she is given such life by an incredible fucking performance for decades on end by Neve Campbell, who, as far as I'm concerned, could win a fucking Oscar for playing Sydney Prescott. And Gale Weathers is so complete because Courtney Cox is so fully that character. You feel like she doesn't even get scripts at this point. She just reacts to things as Gale because she knows exactly what fucking Gale would say in any situation. And she would be an incredible, sublime bitch. And Sydney doesn't have to be like the tabula rasa to put everything on her for any audience in the way that so many Final Girls do. Because Gale is there to fill the gaps of like Sydney being pure light and then Gale being like a great like hard hard edge, a great little force of the darkness, and the companion piece that is the Scream franchise between the two of them says that it doesn't take one type of woman to survive, that it doesn't take one type of woman, personality-wise, they're both white. They're both white, thin, beautiful women. But it doesn't mean taking on all the characteristics of the virgin, of the purity, of the selflessness, of the pure altruism. The asshole can make it to the end too, because you just love her so fucking much and she's unstoppable. And I do love a thing about the Tragedy Girls that exists in the legacy of there not needing to be only one. And I think that's something that's really been embraced in horror in the past few years that I really enjoy. We see people surviving together through the strength of the unit. And I think that's a really nice thing to take out of horror. And yeah, that's a thing that I think is a really winning aspect of Tragedy Girls too.
And what better way to end this episode, Jordan, than on a winning aspect of Tragedy Girls?
Yeah, a movie that we both really like.
Yes. Jordan, again, thank you so much for being you and for your time and for your insight into this film and about at least 12 others throughout the course of this conversation.
Yeah, I'm really glad we made this a milkshake.
It's a trifle. It's a trifle.
It's a trifle. It is a trifle in the spirit of "But I'm a Cheerleader." God, what a fucking masterpiece.
For anyone who has not yet followed you, where can people find your work online? And where can they listen to more of you?
Jeez Louise. You can find hours and hours of me speaking on the Feeling Seen pod that comes out every Thursday on Maximum Fun Network. We're doing very fun interviews over there. Love it. The Odds Pod will be back before too long. Me and Sam will have another season of talking about the intersection of pop culture and genre cinema in the millennium era of horror. Then there is the Whole Movie Podcast, which is currently in its Botcast season, where me and my dear beloved friend, Professor Margot Carlson, as I consider her, are talking about robot politics, robot liberation, robot gender, in the history of robot cinema, all things robots. We side with the robots in the coming Singularity Wars. We will betray our species to fight for the bots. That's on the record. And then there's always the Disaster Girls podcast. So we're talking about disaster movies. So all of those things, you could listen to so many more hours of me speaking. And I couldn't end this pod without acknowledging one more time that Anna didn't want a video chat with me today. So there was I couldn't see her face this entire time because we're on an audio only record. And that is going to be with me for the rest of the day.
The attitude that has gone into that last retort has me beaming. I know you're disappointed in that, but the smile that I'm flashing at you right now,
that I can't see.
Yes.
That I don't get to see.
Yes.
Nope, don't get it. And that's know that this has been a bittersweet experience for me because of that.
This has been noted, and only for you, Jordan, I will sacrifice audio quality and dependability in order to allow you to see my beaming face when you tell me off.
I was just like, if this makes your job easier, it's what I want you to do. But then I'm
you will resent every second of it.
Then I will just start demanding non-podcast hangs for you to just talk to me on video chat because I'm not letting it go entirely. But I of course want only for your happiness, and if me getting sassy with you makes you happy, well, that too is positive for me.
I love it, and I will be discussing it in therapy. It's like, listen, let's unpack why it fills me with so much joy that Jordan is angry at me for not zooming with her.
You're like, let's talk about that. We can work that into my relationship with my parents, my dating life. Let's get it all on the table. Let's bring it all.
Oh my goodness, Jordan! Thank you again so much.
This is just gonna encourage Anna to keep doing this over and over again.
It really will.
Just know that I'm squirming on the other end.
I'm never going back to Zoom.
There it is. Throwing my happiness to the rocks.
For the sake of humor.
Crashing against it like a wave.
Listen, I hope listeners are happy. This is all for you. This is all for you to enjoy this transatlantic banter with no image.
And I hope I know everybody that I was saying this before we were recording as well. So it is real. I was expressing this dismay immediately. My displeasure with not seeing Anna.